Amongst those watching this program, there may be one of you at least who knows or strongly suspects the person responsible.
His grim spree sparked the biggest police manhunt in history, yet the killer was never caught. And this was despite Scotland Yard putting their top detective on the case, the legendary John DeRose.
We hoped to start him up, to get him frightened, to make him run, to do something which would point the finger towards his guilt.
Lots of people put forward different theories about the identity of the killer, but frankly, only one really stands out. And if we could prove this theory, it has every possibility of delivering to the Metropolitan Police something that they didn't have 50 years ago, and that's a genuine prime suspect. The suspect in question's story begins 150 miles away in Abertillery in 1921. There are events that happened there almost 100 years ago that could hold the key to unlocking this mystery. A 15-year-old boy was convicted of a gruesome double child murder. And those murders have chilling parallels with the Hammersmith Nude murders. But can those parallels be measured to build a convincing case that the boy killer went on to become a serial killer? Our search has been supported by a series of extraordinary interviews with the suspect's own daughter.
I couldn't believe it. I thought, my dad hasn't killed anybody. The man that I knew as my dad was a murderer.
All I want are some answers to an enduring mystery. Answers, moreover, that might take us one step forward to identifying the man that the press called Jack the Stripper. Previously on Dark Sun, we examined the crimes of 15-year-old double child murderer Harold Jones and revisited the deaths of the 6 women murdered at the hands of Jack the Stripper. Now the time has come to try and answer the question: could Harold Jones really have gone on later in his life to have become one of the most notorious serial killers in British criminal history? By the autumn of 1965, with the incident room beginning to wind down and nobody being charged for the crimes, it would appear that Jack the Stripper really had gotten away with murder. The killer would have taken huge satisfaction knowing that he'd outwitted Scotland Yard's finest. And in a time before DNA evidence, he would have known his secret would have been safe for the rest of his living days. But why did he stop killing? In my experience, serial killers only stop killing when they're caught, become sick, or die. With this in mind, I'm intrigued once again by a detail in the life of Harold Jones. He began to fall ill in the mid-1960s and was later diagnosed with bone cancer. At around this time, the last of the Jack the Stripper murders occurred. If Jones was sat before me now, there are so many questions I would like to ask him about his life in London during that time, but he died in 1971. However, an extraordinary breakthrough has occurred. The production team has traced the next best thing to speaking to Jones himself: his daughter. She's agreed to do an audio interview. This is the first time she has ever spoken publicly about her father. She remains stunned by the revelation that he was a child murderer in Wales, something he hid from her during his life.
I couldn't believe it. I thought, my dad hasn't killed anybody. I couldn't believe it. It took me quite a while to take it in. The man that I knew as my dad was a murderer. You know, as I say, to this day I still can't believe it.
She's confronted with the reality that he's committed 2 murders, which is unquestionable. That's a heck of a job for her to cope with.
She's got to make the image of her father equate with the memories that she has of her father. And to be fair to her, she's been advised her father has been in jail for killing 2 little girls, an event that she did not understand or know about. Let's listen to a little bit more.
Okay.
When I was born, my gran had died. I just had my granddad. He was a policeman. We got his clock when he retired, you know, the clocks they used to give out. We got that. We still got that. It's upstairs. No, I don't think my granddad knew. Don't think he would have known. But whether Mum did, I don't know. That is something I don't know and I can't find out now. Because she'd passed away. So I never knew whether she knew about his past.
He's got a father-in-law who was a police officer. Now, you would have thought his father-in-law, being a serving police officer, would have picked up the fact that he'd been in prison, because when you and I both know, you're in prison, you pick up the slang, you pick up all the behaviour. After 20 years, it takes a long time to get rid of that. So I'm surprised the father-in-law hasn't picked up that he's been inside.
Surely, if he had done these so-called murders, they would have tracked him down. He's not here to be able to say ask him anything, to find out really. Okay, he admitted to the ones in Wales, but people can change, can't they? So it's not necessarily because he did this, it doesn't mean to say that he's done it again. So, because he lived in that area, he must have done them. But did he? Nobody's been able to tell me he did or he didn't. What I'd like to hear is he didn't do them, it wasn't him. But if he did, I would like to know he did. But I don't know if we'd ever know why he did. It would be hard, obviously, as you know, for you to hear something like that. But it would put closure to things. If somebody said, no, we have proof it was him that done that, I wouldn't like it. It would probably hurt a lot. But at least it put an end to things.
Harold Jones, the father, appears to be a very different man to the boy who went to prison for murder. Prison records often detail an offender's rehabilitation journey. Mike and I have uncovered Harold Jones's prison psychiatric reports, and they give us cause for concern. These words are taken from those reports. He states that he attacked the girls to kill them, and he denies that the attacks on the girls were actuated or accompanied by any sexual desire. This, in the face of the evidence, cannot be believed. This psychiatric report clearly demonstrates that Harold Jones's sexual pleasure was derived through the act of violence upon his victims, not through the act of sex, that his state of sexual arousal was achieved through murder. An ejaculation of semen had occurred either before, during, or after the attack on Florence, and in every probability is connected to that attack. In other words, sadism. The interviewing psychiatrist goes on to highlight his concerns about the letter from Jones's young sweetheart, Lena Mortimer, who's appalled at his request to spit in her mouth, And we should also remember the collection of ladies' handkerchiefs Jones had upon him when he was arrested. He says that Jones denies the ladies' pocket handkerchiefs found in his possession had any connection with sexual desires at all, but I do not think this can be believed. His statement to me that he took all the handkerchiefs from Lena because he was fond of her is somewhat unconvincing. He's asking Lena to spit in his mouth. The spitting should be regarded as a sadistic manifestation. To put it crudely, if we've got a young man as a teenager who's a sadist, that sadism isn't going to disappear when he's an adult, is it? It's going to develop.
Without any doubt, I would expect it to become more violent, more sexual. I think it shows quite clearly this was a sexual and a violent offender.
Jones's psychiatric report reveals him to be an unreformed sexual sadist. The report continues, the aggressiveness of the male is accompanied by that certain pleasure in the manifestation of power over a woman. Also, the sexual act reaches its highest gratification when accompanied by cruelty. And most damning of all, the prisoner, however, shows no remorse for the crimes and no apparent desire for any alteration in his condition.
What I find much more worrying is no treatment.
Oh.
There is absolutely no treatment of this man at all. He's gone in as a sex offender, a violent man. He comes out as a sex offender, a violent man. They talk about him being very well behaved because he's institutionalised. He does as he's told within the system. But he makes it very clear that he isn't going to talk to anybody about his offence in any depth. This guy is dangerous because we've done nothing with him. There's nothing in the reports to indicate that he's changed one iota.
And therefore, we would not have released him because we would have said the likelihood is this man will kill again.
Yeah, and I think he has the potential to kill and probably would have killed sometime after 1941 when he's released.
With no treatment for this sexual sadism, Harold Jones left prison. The authorities didn't keep a close tab on this still dangerous man for one good reason. He was lost in the fog of war. Conscripted in 1941, he served in Libya and stayed in the armed forces for almost 5 years. Prized engineering skills honed in the prison workshop saw him become a gun fitter. After being demobbed in 1946, Jones headed for London. His army discharge papers highly commended him to any future employer as a fine, skilled engineer. London was the perfect place to get lost and start again, and Jones did just that by taking a new name and a wife. Harold Jones married in 1948, and records show that he used a false name, Stevens, his mother's maiden name. A new baby was soon on the way. Here now was a golden opportunity to totally reinvent himself to erase his deadly history. But the pull of Harold Jones's dark past would prove too much for him to leave behind because he was about to make an extraordinary pilgrimage back to the scene of his crimes.
Mum was in school with the girls, so Mum knew the girls, so obviously Mum had told us about the murders. It was the summer of 1950, and I can remember being a young girl, and Mum said about us going up the cemetery to put flowers on our Nana and Gransh's grave. So as it was a nice day, we said yes, we'd like to go. So we caught the bus up, and we went up to Nana and Gransh's grave, put some flowers on the grave and tidied it up, and then we come down because we had to wait for the bus to come back. So I can remember us sitting on the seat, and Mum took some lemonade up because it was a hot day. So after we had our pop, it wasn't very long after, Mum said to us, "Oh, come on girls, we're going quick." So we wondered what was up. Well, she didn't tell us till after we got home that Harold Jones had walked in through the gate. So what he was doing up there, That day, I don't know, because his mother and father were still alive at that time, so he wouldn't have gone up to their graves. So perhaps he was going up just to have a look at the girls' graves, just to gloat. I don't know.
Jones took a huge risk seeking out Frida Bonnell and Florence Little's graves. For me, this wasn't a mark of a man paying his respects. This was a man seeking a form of communion with the dead. Many killers in history have sought the same kind of pleasure. It gives them power over their victims, even after death. I believe it's this very same need for power over the dead that possessed whoever committed the Hammersmith Nude murders, a connection that Mike has also made whilst preparing his profile of Jack the Stripper.
What's fascinating me is that he's escalated, so he's actually keeping the bodies. Most people, if they kill, they psychologically and physically want to distance themselves from the victim. The serial killer keeps the victim for pleasure. They want to possess it. You're playing God. That's what they like, being God. We know that he stripped the bodies and taken all the clothing. Is he dressing up in them? Is he making them wear the clothes after death? And we know from the pathologist's report that clearly 2 of the victims were dressed after death and then stripped. So is he working out some fantasy with them? One of the things we know about serial killers is they like trophies. In this case, we seem to have somebody who's taken the teeth. We know that one of the victims had a dental plate, that's disappeared. We know that quite a few of them have had teeth knocked out, some of them clearly post-mortem. So this guy, for some reason, is taking teeth as part of its souvenir.
Mike's profile also shed some light on his basic domestic routine.
We know that most killings are done by males under the age of 25. They tend to be very impulsive and not organised. Once you start looking at organised offences, you can then start saying the killers are likely to be much older, more mature. They're more mature in the way they're thinking, they're more mature in the way they act. In these cases, we can say quite categorically, this was done by an older man. One of the things I found fascinating was all the offences were in the weekdays and they were all after 11 o'clock at night. We know that some of the offences are likely to happen on Friday night, early Saturday morning, but there would be nothing for the rest of Saturday or Sunday. This indicates that he's got a life on a Saturday, Sunday that doesn't give him the freedom to go out and commit offences.
Mike's offender profile helps us build an even better picture of Jack the Stripper, and I'm intrigued by some of the similarities in the profile that match what we now know about Harold Jones. But there are still many unanswered questions, and I believe there's only one person who can answer them.
Hello.
Hi Jackie, it's David. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Jackie. Jackie, I think you and I have got to go and speak to Harold Jones's daughter. There's so much information there that we should be pursuing.
Yeah, good idea. Absolutely.
I mean, she'll be able to help us with where he worked, when he worked in those places. What other information has she got that can throw some light onto this case?
And also, it would be really good to pin down from her a chronological order of the addresses that they lived at, so she can remember from a small child up until the point that she left home.
Okay, thanks very much, Jackie.
Okay, nice to speak to you. Bye-bye.
Bye. You know, the more I think about it, the more I realise that Jones's daughter is a real link back to Jones the man, Jones the killer, potentially Jones the serial killer, and his daughter might therefore just be the key that's going to unlock this entire mystery.
I can't emphasize how generous the daughter and her husband are being in helping us with such a difficult matter. They're also prepared to share her family archive of photos and documents, which revealed what Harold Jones looked like whilst he lived in London, and also the identity he used.
Oh, this is their marriage certificate. See, it was Harry Stevens.
Yeah, engineer. So
Your dad's quite small in a sense, because how tall are you?
5 foot something. Wasn't really tall.
So he's about 5'4" then.
Yeah. There he is.
He's hiding.
Yeah, it's behind there.
Did he often wear a trilby hat?
Towards the end, yeah. Don't know why, but he did.
What sort of occupations do you remember him having?
Well, he used to be a sheet metal worker.
A sheet metal worker?
Yeah.
And where was the sheet metal work? Where would he do the sheet metal work? And where was the
That
office?
was in Acton.
In Acton itself. Yeah.
Do you know where in Acton it was?
No.
Until you were told of his background, you had no knowledge that your father was Harold Jones.
I did know his name was Harold Jones, yes, because when we moved to Hammersmith, he used Jones for working.
Oh, okay.
And I did question that with Mum.
What did she say?
She said, oh, it's another person's got the same name, so
Right.
Dad's changed. I'll always remember that, because I did ask, because I found something with Jones, and I said, who's this? Because I didn't know. And she said, oh, it's Dad. And I said, well, no, it's not his right name. And she said, no. She said he had to change his name while he was working.
This is a crucial new piece of information. Harold Jones changed his address, job, and name at a time that coincides with the discovery of the location where the killer had been storing the bodies in Acton. And just as importantly, given that Jones had worked in Acton, I'm convinced that as an engineer, he would have known about the closure of the Napier Aero Engine Factory, a sprawling, abandoned site. As the conversation about Harold Jones progresses, the daughter remembers another disturbing memory about her father.
I know that they had an argument and Dad just went. He would never hit Mum or me. I never got smacked or anything. And he would rather walk out the house than to hurt her.
Did she know where he'd gone?
Yeah.
How did she know, do you think?
I don't know how she knew, but she took me with her when he went. So she knew where to find him, but I asked, she didn't want to say anything.
And he had a kind of a bolt hole to go to.
Yeah, rather than, he didn't like to argue, so he would walk out, and that's obviously he found somewhere to go.
Can you remember where the bolt hole was?
It was in Hammersmith.
In Hammersmith itself. And do you remember anything about it? Was a
It was
flat?
like one of these hostel places.
A hostel.
And he buggered off and went in that DOS house down Shepherd's Bush Road. You don't know what he was up to while he was in there. There's no smoke without a fire, is there? You know what I mean? He kept it all them years to himself, which has got to play on your conscience. I don't care who you are. You've murdered someone. It's something you can't tell your new wife, and you've had a kid and you can't tell her. It's a hell of a strain on someone.
The thing is, you are not responsible for anything that your father may or may not have done. You don't have to carry any guilt or shame on behalf of him.
Well, I'd like to know the truth.
Sure.
If that can ever be.
Established.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bolt hole Harold Jones used to stay in was called Rowton House, a working man's hostel on Shepherd's Bush Road near Hammersmith. Records show that Harold Jones first stayed there after being demobbed. This bolt hole was at the epicentre of the Jack the Stripper murders, and Harold Jones's daughter remembers picking him up from there around that time. Bridget O'Hara, the sixth victim, was last seen close to Rowton House on the day she died. She was with a man who had previously been seen drinking with a small group of Welsh men in a local pub. The last sighting of Bridget was walking down the road with this man, who's described as being very short and wearing a trilby hat. We believe this new information about Rowton House is a critical new lead, and one Jackie is looking to explore further, along with other information we know about where Jones lived and worked.
Environment's really important, I think. Understanding and knowing where prostitutes work and frequent in the pubs. That's a real kind of essential part of it. So it's familiar. I definitely think that the man lived in this area and worked in West London. That's what I believe to be true, that this area was very comfortable for him.
Jackie has arranged to talk to Dr. Kim Rossmo. Kim is a geographic profiler, one of the FBI's go-to men in serial murder cases. He helps investigators to create murder maps based on empirical data about where the killer's victims' bodies were found. These maps can suggest links between where the killer lived, worked, or socialized. He's created for us one such map for the Jack the Stripper murders.
Could you just explain what is geographical profiling?
Geographic profiling is an investigative tool that's used in serial crime cases. Its purpose is to help police focus on the offender's most likely anchor points. Now, that might be their home, it might be some place they start their search from. In some cases, offenders' work is more important than their home. There's been a lot of research on what's called journey to crime. How far does an offender travel from their home or their anchor point to where they offend? As you move further away from an offender's home, the probability they'll commit a crime drops. The other factor is there tends to be a buffer zone around offenders' home because they don't want to operate too close to home. Their car might be recognized, someone may be a friend or a neighbor and recognize their face. So overall, in a serial case, we'll have a number of locations, each one of them giving a geographic clue, but together providing a pattern that gives us a lot of information. One of the areas was north of Chiswick High Road, south of the Vale and the Uxbridge Road. It stretches down all the way to Lyric Hammersmith. So the second one, which is to its east, focuses kind of around Holland Park down to Kensington High Street.
We're looking at a particular suspect who we know, when he was a young man, aged 15, murdered 2 girls on separate occasions. Sometimes later on release, he ended up in an area within one of the hotspots that you identified.
Well, based on what you've described, he sounds like a good suspect, but you also have to consider both elements to make someone a good suspect and elements that make someone a bad suspect. If this was an active investigation today, these are different angles and theories the investigators would use the geoprofile to help explore, to help prioritize their efforts.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's been an absolute delight. Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Kim Rossmo's saying these are good indicators to police. So where we had a big area of 24 miles that John Rose was looking at, this talks about 1.6 miles and 1 mile, just under 3 square miles. That's hugely useful tool.
This information from Kim also intriguingly marries up with a new piece of information Jackie has found out about the identity of a man who worked at a location within the hotspot.
Hello?
Hi, David, it's Jackie.
Oh, hi, Jackie. How did you get on with Kim Rossmo?
Very well indeed, thank you.
I did some research about a company called Napier Aero Engines, Acton, and they have a roll call of all their ex-employees. And I have a man here in the name of H.L. Stevens, who was employed next door to the building where 4 of the bodies were known to be stored in the transformer shed.
This new information about a Mr. H.L. Stevens is fascinating, as we know Jones went by the name Stevens during part of his life, and it's a finding which potentially forms another compelling piece of our puzzle. But pieces remain missing, partly because as civilians, we don't have the powers of the police to obtain certain documents, such as Harold Jones's work records. The last time the Metropolitan Police looked at the case was just over a decade ago. They remained unable to draw any firm conclusions as to the identity of the killer. But Harold Jones wasn't on the police radar when that cold case review was done. If he had been, would that information have changed the outcome of the police's findings? I'm now convinced that we need Jackie to use her contacts at Scotland Yard to get hold of the man who did the review in 2007 and get him to look at what we've found so far.
Do you know the detective who did that review?
I've heard of him, Alan Jackman, a very, very experienced murder squad detective. I can get on and do that for you, David, and come back when I've made contact.
Okay, Jackie, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Do you know, if we can get Alan Jackman, who conducts the cold case review, as part of our investigation, that really would add some weight to what it is that we've been doing. In particular, you know, it's always difficult to get the police to reopen a case, but if we've got the man who conducts the cold case investigation saying, actually, if I had had this evidence when I conducted my cold case review, that seems to me to be really significant.
The contents of the 2007 cold case review remain unavailable to the public, but Jackie has tracked down Detective Alan Jackman. Jackie is particularly keen to see if Alan can recall ever seeing a suspect list from the era, and if so, did the name of Harold Jones or Harry Stevens appear on it?
In your review, did you find out whether or not there was any DNA available for examination from cases within the 1960s?
We did a thorough forensic review on the case. There were a lot of exhibits on the schedule. Unfortunately, none of those, we were unable to find any of those exhibits. Many of them did, from the schedule, obviously carry possibilities for DNA. There were semen stains from knickers taken from victims. Unfortunately, through the passage of time, we were unable to locate them.
As the review officer in 2007, and had you had the name of Harold Jones and the information that I've given you, do you consider that Harold Jones would be a prime suspect to consider for the Hammersmith Nude murders?
Well, firstly, we were lucky enough to find the original report written by Detective Superintendent Baldock, within which contained quite a long list of suspects which he looked at the time. There was another list of suspects which wasn't contained within the report. On the list within the report, neither the name Jones nor Stevens appeared. And by the time that I was doing the review in 2007, there was no information on Jones or Stevens being the same person. So he didn't form a part of the review. Subsequently, from the information that I've been told, Jones would certainly have been on that list of suspects.
I wondered if you would be kind enough to come back with me down to Abertillery in South Wales, where enormous amounts of intelligence and information that I would like to present to you for your examination as a very experienced review officer, and look at the work that the team have gathered over the last 10 months.
I'd be fascinated. I would love to go look at the evidence that you found against Jones.
Thank you.
Many months have passed since we began our investigation in Abertillery, and the time has come to return to the incident room there. Our team have compiled a comprehensive list of all the evidence we've unearthed, and we're about to present this to Detective Alan Jackman. Alan will consider our findings to see if there's any merit in presenting them to Scotland Yard.
Let's start by things like age. One of the things profile suggests that this is an older man because he was organized. And he's organized in a number of different ways. We know that he stripped the bodies, and we know that he took trophies, specifically of the clothing and the teeth. There's also, I think, some information about height. Robin, what height were the victims?
They were all 5 feet, 5 feet 2 inches tall, so they were very petite women. On the night that the last victim disappeared, one of her drinking companions saw her walking off at closing time with a chap that she seemed to have known, and he was described as being 5'6", wearing a sheepskin jacket and a trilby.
A number of the victims were found in a particular area related to a particular trading estate, Alan, weren't they?
Yes. The Heron trading estate, which was quite a large area, containing lots of factory units and where thousands of people were employed.
Our killer has access to the lockup that he's able to use. That might also indicate that our killer was also employed there. So let's bear this profile in mind and think to what extent there's some mirroring in relation to the profile of Jack the Stripper with what we know definitively about Harold Jones. Neil, this is clearly your area of expertise. In relation to Frida and Florence's murder, there's evidence of Harold Jones storing the bodies.
Well, we know he stored the body of Frida in the shed at the back of Duke Street, and we know that he stored the body of Florence in his own attic at Darren Road.
I'm also interested, Neil, in this idea of trophy taking, in particular the clothes and the teeth. And what do we know in relation to Harold Jones?
The police arrested him and they found in his pocket 7 ladies' handkerchiefs. Now, there was something interesting as well. In his pocket, on the morning he was arrested, the police found a letter in his trousers pocket. It was from a young girl called Lena Mortimer. And in that letter, it stated something to the words that, Harold, you really offended me when you asked me to spit in your mouth.
Spitting in the mouth, I think, ties up with the sadism that we see in the Jack the Stripper murders. The idea of the killer's fixation related to the teeth, to the mouth. These women were sadistically murdered. And because of that sadism, which had a sexual overtone, they lost their lives. Sadism doesn't dissipate over time. Sadism always finds some way of expressing itself in terms of the killer's life and lifestyle. So when you start to put these things together, there's an uncanny mirroring of these early murders in the 1920s and how aspects of those murders are reappearing in the murders that we see in the 1960s. And your work in particular, your part of the investigation, Jackie, throws up information in relation to whether or not we can determine was Harold Jones Jack the Stripper.
Thank you, David. What I'd like to do is play some excerpts from the interview, and you will hear the words of Harold Jones' daughter. She remembers her father leaving home on 2 occasions for 2 to 3 days. She asked her mum, because it troubled the little girl, why he'd done it, and her mum said, because he had to get away. This troubled the girl, and when she was older, she asked her mum about it again. And I'd like you, Janet, to play the next clip, please.
I know they had an argument. He wouldn't argue with Mum and he'd walk out and he would end up there. But why did he have to go? Why could he not just argue it out with Mum like people do? Was he frightened that he might have done something to Mum?
What do you mean?
Was he afraid that if he stayed and argued with Mum, he would have killed her?
No.
He was very afraid to lose his temper by the sound of everything that's gone on, that he might do something.
What is also interesting is that the daughter reveals another name change. All the paperwork was in the name of Stevens.
So why does he want to change his name back to Jones, having been called Stevens? And might I suggest to you, that's because the name Stevens is even more toxic than Jones. And he's worried that that might mean that people start to investigate this man called Harry Stevens, who might be connected to the Jack the Stripper murders.
So I wondered if you, David, would put up on the map, on this road here, 221 Hammersmith Road.
So within the western hotspot of the Jack the Stripper murders, we've got where Harold Jones disappears to when tensions within the home become too much for him. I mean, this is quite extraordinary, isn't it? This is beginning to look like some empirical evidence based on our profiles and then based on the evidence of what we know about what Harold Jones did and what people said about him when he was incarcerated.
We're now ready to ask Alan Jackman what he thinks of our findings and if he would be willing to bring any influence he has within the Metropolitan Police to bear in order to get the case reviewed.
Now, Alan, you and Jackie were police officers. If you suddenly get information suggesting that a convicted double child murderer with the kind of profile of what he does to his victims was living within one of the key areas where the police were investigating a sequence of murders, surely for you, for any police investigation, that's pretty important information, isn't it?
He would shoot to the top of the suspect list without a doubt.
You'd never heard of Harold Jones when you did the first cold case review. If you had heard of Harold Jones with all of this information, how high up your suspect list would he have been?
Well, as we know, Harold Jones didn't feature in the first inquiry at all. But had I known then what I know now, much further research would have been done on Harold Jones, and he would have been in the highest level of suspect.
In fact, he would be, Harold Jones, a very good prime suspect.
Yes.
There's lots of things that we do know, there's lots of things that we don't know. But don't we owe to the victims' families who are still living, don't we owe something to them to pursue this a little bit more? Because we've come so far as civilians, the Metropolitan Police can take it further.
Alan?
There are still avenues to pursue, and I would certainly relish being involved in any further investigation.
I'm really grateful to hear that, because this is a case where there are still living human beings who are intimately connected to the 6 women who died. And it seems to me we do have a moral responsibility to those descendants. I think we need to be part of the process that brings justice to the descendants of the 6 women who were killed by Jack the Stripper.
I agree. Yeah.
It's almost 100 years since Harold Jones killed Frida Bonnell and Florence Little. Over the years, their graves had fallen into a state of disrepair. However, the people of Abertillery have now raised money for the headstones to be repaired, and the graves have now been restored, forming a fitting and enduring tribute to 2 children who lost their lives, but will never be forgotten.
No one who's heard this story can fail to be moved by it. It's a pleasure to be able to remove this cover. I hope that Florence and her family will rest in peace, knowing that we've not forgotten them.
Well done.